All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, you informed me it's not as cold as what it was, but it's slowly creeping into spring over there.
Yeah, it's slowly getting better. It's getting lighter. We're on the way to Easter in a few weeks' time, and we've had now 4 weeks of Super League, so it seems to go very quickly, mate. And this weekend it's the Challenge Cup, so lots of things happening. And over down your way, you've just had the opening week of the opening round, I should say, of the NRL competition. So lots of quite interesting results there, including one or two one-sided contests, actually, which we might want to sort of explore a little. Why are there so many one-sided games in the opening round of the competition? Is it just pure coincidence, or is there some more fundamental underlying reason? I don't know what your
Yeah,
thoughts are on that.
well, mate, and there were two. I mean, there was three there. Three, you could almost argue, four surprising results. Like the Storm beating Parramatta 52 points to 4. I don't think anyone could have predicted that scoreline.
No, no.
Um, you look at the Warriors Roosters game, Warriors winning 42 points to 18, and the Roosters have kind of been tipped as, a potential favourite this year, given the squad they have. You look at the Sharks Titans game, Sharks won 50 points to 10. And
Mm,
then the big surprising one for me, the Broncos losing 26-0 at
at
home
home to
to the
Penrith, yeah,
Panthers.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
I'm not sure
Well,
if
I just wonder whether Brisbane's visit to England a couple of weeks earlier just played out badly for them. The teams that make travel, all the way around the world, does it actually affect them for a few weeks afterwards? Even, just psychologically, were they not really ready for the opening game? Who knows? I mean, they
yeah,
didn't look it, did
I
they?
no, and like I was at the match and watching the boys play, and I think within the first 20 minutes, you could just feel that the Broncos weren't on. They were making some silly errors, and the completion rate was terrible. I think going into halftime, they had only completed about 60% of their sets. The high ball was again an issue for them. I know the Hull KL were targeting the Broncos wingers in the World Club Challenge, and that worked. And I think Penrith probably, did a bit of study on that match, and it felt like every single attacking high bomb that was put towards Dean Mariner's corner, every contest, it felt like we were losing that contest. So there's definitely a lot of work there to be done for the Broncos, and yeah, worrying signs. But it is only round one.
It's only round one, yeah. The the the
That's
the
right.
the, the, the competition isn't won in round one, as they say, is it?
Mm,
So,
that's it.
if they're still playing like that by round 27 or whatever it is, then that's the time to start worrying, isn't it?
Oh yeah, mate. And for me, I think the Sharks Titans game, like we saw the way the Titans played in the preseason challenge. They looked really good, obviously under Josh Hannay this season, and I think hopes were high amongst the Titans fans. And then Sharks came out and at the hands of Braden Trindle, who put on an absolute masterclass in that first half. Yeah, they put 50 points on the Titans. So I think the excitement has died down a little bit on the Gold Coast, I'm afraid. But
It's a
as we said,
shame.
only round
Although
one.
they play the Dolphins this week, don't they? And that should be quite interesting because the Dolphins had a loss as well at home to South Sydney. So, all the four Queensland teams started with a defeat, which was a bit disappointing, really, I would have thought, for you as a Queenslander.
Oh, mate, certainly not what you want to see. I am looking at this week, though, and I'm hoping some of the Queensland sides might be able to bounce back. The Broncos have got Parramatta on, or tomorrow night, our time, Thursday night, and it'll be Friday morning, England time. But, Parramatta had a big loss against the Melbourne Storm to start part two of round one. And the thing is, when you're facing a team who's just had a massive loss, they're just as hungry to try and right that wrong.
Oh,
So
gosh, yes. It's actually
it's
Thursday
gonna.
morning our time, that game, because you're ahead of us. So I think you're 11
Oh,
hours ahead of us at the moment. So, yeah, it'll be on our TV screen or on watch NRL at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. So
Awesome.
yeah, in fact, I'm surprised it's not being broadcast on Sky, that game. But anyway, it's not being, and no, two teams that are going to be pretty desperate to get off the mark. But at least we know that one of them will, don't we?
Yeah, that's right, mate. And I just hope it's the Broncos for my sake.
Mm.
But mate, also plenty of action happening over in the Super League. Just looking at all the scores here. Is there any that surprised you, mate? Looks like York had a pretty good battle against Warrington. A lot of points in that game, actually, 38-30 on Saturday. Or was it? I don't know if this is in
The
Australian time
only
or UK
well, funnily
time.
enough, the only prediction that I got wrong in the media tipping competition. And by the way, I got two spot on tips, got the margins right in two games as well. So I'm flying high at the moment in the
Is
media
that
tipping
extra points
competition, mate. Yeah, you get
if you
extra
guess the
points if you
margin?
get the margin right. Yeah, yeah, and I hit it spot on with two this week, so I'm flying high at the moment.
That's
Probably,
awesome.
probably for the only time this season. But the only game that I got wrong, I thought Lee would bounce back and beat Catalan Dragons, and they failed to do that. Catalans beat them 22-16 at Lee Sports Village, and Lee are down now next to the bottom of the table, just one win from four games, and that win was their opening game against Leeds Rhinos. So a bit disappointing for them. And the news has come out in the last few days that the chairman Mike Latham has quit, although he's not explained why he's quit as chairman of Lee. And of course, they never replaced Chris Chester as director of rugby, and I wonder whether that's having a slightly negative effect. I wonder whether their recruitment this year perhaps wasn't quite as smart as it was in previous years. That's pure speculation on my part because we've got to see how the season pans out, haven't we? And you never quite know. It's difficult to judge it on just the first four rounds, but Lee have sort of looked as though they're struggling to get into top gear so far, and they need to get sorted out fairly quickly, I think, because although they're only 2 points behind the playoff places at the moment, they can't afford to get any further behind very quickly. So it's going to be an interesting year for them, I think. I think, Jake.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, mate. Wigan back on top of the table. Although they
Yeah,
have faced a few injury concerns, I hear Bevan French could be spending some time
Bevan
on the
French is out
sidelines.
for several weeks now. Yeah, he's out for a lengthy period. Jay Field is out with appendicitis, which is a fairly unusual thing to be out for, but he obviously got struck down by that condition. So they're going to be playing in the Challenge Cup this weekend against Bradford without Field and French. And if you make that statement without Field and French, then it inspires hope in all the other teams, doesn't it? Because whenever those two guys are missing, Wigan's results tend to be a bit less consistent. And Bradford might think they've got a great chance. And let's not forget that Hull FC went to Wigan last year in the Challenge Cup and beat them on their own ground. So it should be an interesting game this weekend between those two sides, I think, because Bradford have started life very well in Super League. They lost very narrowly to St Helens on Friday, on Saturday, was it Saturday night or at the weekend anyway? And Bradford are motoring pretty well under Kurt Haggerty, and I think a lot of people said to me before the season started that Kurt Haggerty would do a great job as Bradford coach. He'd been very effective with Paul Rowley at Salford, and we saw that at St Helens. It was an interesting clash between Rowley and Haggerty, the two ex-Salford coaches, and Paul Rowley just came out very narrowly on top with a late score that just won it for them. But from Dion Cross on 76 minutes. But Bradford played very well, and they've got one of the more underrated halfbacks in their side. Rowan Milnes. I've always had a very high regard for Rowan Milnes, and Rowan's never really had the breaks, I think. He's always had injuries at bad times as Rowan Milnes, but he's got one of the best short kicking games near the opposition line in Super League, in my view. And I thought he showed that on against St Helens, and he's a very smart player. Reminds me a little bit of, in some respects, of Mark Sneyd, with his intelligence and so on, his game management skills. And I think he's going to be a terrific asset to Bradford. Hopefully, if he manages to avoid injury this year, which, I'll touch wood on his behalf that he can do that.
Yep. Now, Wakefield also got a tight win over Hull FC. It was amusing watching some of the highlights back in that match, and it seemed like there was a few moments throughout the game where Wakefield were making some errors, and they'd flash the camera back to Darryl Powell, and he just looked very upset with some of the decisions they were making, but they were able to fight through and get the win.
Darryl is a fairly expressive coach, isn't he? You can tell how the game's going just by looking at his face, and he's his face says it all. I think Wakefield just did narrowly beat Hull. Hull are another team, by the way, that have been hit by an incredible number of injuries, and I was tipping them to be the big improvers at the start of the season, but they've already had so many players ruled out. Will Price, of course, is probably the key one. He's going to be out for the full season by the look of it. And it's funny. Some clubs do seem to suffer more injuries than others, and Hull are one of those clubs. The other one, of course, is Huddersfield, who have put out a statement listing God knows how many players. Let me just have a quick look at this. They've listed about 16 players with 16 players with injuries who are unavailable for selection at the moment. I mean, that's just after 4 rounds of Super League. That's just absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? And you've got to say, they need to investigate why that keeps happening, because it's year after year that Huddersfield seem to get all these injuries, and you could say, well, they're just an unlucky club, but perhaps there's more to it than that. And the fact that it keeps recurring makes you think that it's probably not a coincidence, and there's something fundamentally wrong there. Who knows? But only they can answer that, Jake.
Yeah, and it's a few things. You'd probably point to the strength and conditioning. Like you'd be asking questions about your programs in the preseason. Are we doing enough to prep our bodies for, the start of the season? I don't know if there's been any studies on this, but I've got a theory that more injuries occur during the wetter months of a season, and that can just be,
I think so.
you know,
I think very muddy pitches are perhaps the cause of some injuries early in the season. As the pitches get drier and firmer, I think we probably see fewer injuries. But that's speculation on my part, mate. I'm no expert in this area, so certainly don't take anything that I say as being particularly well informed. But just as an observer, you've got to say that it does look to me as though, wet, gluey sort of pictures maybe don't do an awful lot of good for some players who just who just pick up these leg injuries that then keep them out for considerable periods.
yeah, yeah. I I growing up playing rugby over here. I always I got injured a little bit growing up playing rugby, but it was always in the wet when I got injured, and it was just because you
Yeah,
might
yeah.
lose your footing before hitting the defensive line, and then you cop a bad knock, or you roll an ankle or do a knee. So yeah, there might need to be a study done on that, Martin. We can't make any conclusive evidence just yet.
No, no,
Uh,
no.
but yeah, I do feel for Huddersfield, and I was going to ask you that question. Are they the most unlucky side in the competition? Or I guess in the Super League area, you could almost make an argument.
Well, I always feel desperately sorry for Luke Robinson, the Huddersfield coach, because he always seems to have his back against the wall. Um, his top players, are very rarely available. If we just look at who's currently out, for example, for them, they've got going down squad numbers. Number 1, Niall Evalds. Number 2, Adam Swift. Number 5, Sam Halsall. Number 7, Adam Clune. Number 9, Zach Wolford. Number 12, Sam Hewitt. 13, Harry Rushton. That's more than half of their starting 1 to 13 players. Then they've got Matty English, Joe Greenwood, Liam Sutcliffe, George Flanagan, their young fullback. He's the latest to have, suffered an ankle injury and had to be helped off the pitch against Hull KR at the weekend. It never seems to end for them. And, it's some of their better players. I mean, Adam Clune, the club captain, just doesn't seem to be able to get onto the pitch for them. And that's so damn disappointing if you're a Huddersfield, or if you're the Huddersfield coach and if you're a Huddersfield supporter.
Yeah, mate. And the other thing I was going to mention is like usually around mid-season, 3 quarters into the season, that's when the conversations start being had about squad depth and how squad depth is so important to get through a full season. But it's very rare that 4 rounds in you're talking about it this early in the season.
Mm.
But it just goes to show the importance of having that depth in your squad because
Oh gosh,
injuries can
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Mm. But mate,
Yes, and the thing about
sorry.
injuries, mate, is that it does give chances to younger players on the fringes of the first team to come into the first team and show what they can do. I mean, Jack Farrimond at Wigan, he's getting a significant run out now because of French and Field's absence, and he's just turned 20. And whereas last year he was perhaps a little bit inexperienced, I think this year I mean, if you watch the way he played against Toulouse at the weekend, he looks a very accomplished young star now. And actually, I was saying to Matty Pete, the Wigan coach, yesterday that when French and Field recover and everybody's back to full fitness, it's going to be quite difficult for him to leave Jack Farrimond out of the side. But, obviously, 3 into 2 won't go, and he's going to have to leave somebody out. And it's unlikely he'd leave Bevan French out. So, Jack Farrimond, when they come back, may have to be kicking his heels again, or perhaps on the bench or whatever. But as young players come through, they often get a chance with other players, taking the place of other players being injured. They stake a claim for a place, and then they demonstrate that they should, they deserve a place on merit, don't they? And that's always been the case of how young players have forced their way into a team. But just still on this injuries business, Hull KR last week, they won at Huddersfield, as you know, and they were able to pick a squad. If you looked at their 21-man squad that they selected before the game, the only player missing from their numbers 1 to 19 squad numbers was their fullback Arthur Morg, who suffered an injury against Brisbane in the World Cup Challenge. Every other player is available, so they've had no injuries other than Arthur Morg, and you've got to say that that's either incredible good luck, or are they actually just brilliant at making sure that their players don't suffer injury? And again, I can't really comment on it because I've not got a sufficient insight to be able to pass judgment. But they do seem to get year after year fewer injuries than the vast majority of other clubs at Hull KR. So the implication is that they're certainly doing something right, and it allows Willie Peters to pick from strength most of the time. And that's marvellous for him, and obviously they take advantage of that situation. So good for them. But the other clubs need to probably learn a bit from the way they do things.
Yeah, well, mate, like they say, availability is the best ability, or durability is the best ability.
Well,
um,
it's interesting
but
you say that because I remember talking to another club owner during the close season, and he was saying, which clubs do you think will improve a lot this year? And I said, well, I think Hull have made some really good signings. And he said, are you sure about that? I said, why do you say that? And he said, well, because some of the signings they've made are of players who have spent quite a bit of time out with injury. And, you've got to be very careful that you're not signing players who are going to be missing significant parts of the season with injury. And we're seeing a little bit of that, I'm afraid, with Hull, that some of the players they have signed are currently out. And again, you can't blame the players if they suffer injury. That's just a fact of life. But it is amazing how some players just seem less prone to getting niggling injuries that keep them out of action, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes it's just luck of the draw. There's been so many brilliant talents that have had their careers cut short due to injury, and some people are extremely lucky and go through their whole career without a serious injury, like Cameron Smith. But mate, I just noticed we haven't really spoken about the poll of the week, the TotalRL.com readers poll. The question is, what would you like to see coming from discussions between the RFL and the NRL in terms of the future administration of the game in the Northern Hemisphere? The options are the NRL to take over completely, the NRL to become a 50-50 partner with the RFL, the NRL to invest in the British game but with control remaining in the hands of the RFL, and the fourth option, the RFL to reject the NRL having any role in the British game. What would you like to see, Martyn? And I guess what would you think is the most popular pick?
Well, it's got to be a partnership if it's going to be anything. I don't think we can countenance the NRL simply taking over the whole show and running it in its entirety. I think that would be too difficult for the English RFL to accept. So I'd go. I think there needs to be some sort of 50-50 partnership. Obviously, if the NRL is going to invest a significant amount of money, then it needs to have some say in how it's spent. There's no question about that. But actually, the option that's winning the poll at the moment is the NRL to take over completely. 47.80% have voted for that. At the other extreme, the RFL to reject the NRL having any role in the British game, only 11.54% have gone for that option. With the other two options, the NRL to become a 50-50 partner or the NRL to invest but control remaining in the hands of the RFL, both hovering around 20%. So, it's fairly clear that there's a significant, probably just under half of all the people who voted in that poll would like to see the NRL come in and take over completely, which is, I'm assuming that two of the people who might have voted in that poll maybe were Peter Vlandis and Andrew Abdo. Who knows? I don't know whether they're aware of that particular poll, but if they are, maybe they and the people at NRL HQ have been instructed to cast their votes. Who knows?
There might have been a
I'm obviously
company
joking,
email.
but yeah. But
Go and vote on
we've
this.
no idea who does. It's interesting actually, Jake, because we do have no idea who does vote in these polls, and we do get more than a four-figure number voting in these readers' polls. So it's quite interesting how they turn out, and sometimes they turn out quite different from what you might expect. So who knows?
Yeah, you can never quite gauge what the rugby league community is feeling or thinking at any one time.
No.
Uh, but mate, it leads me perfectly into your column that you wrote this week. You've given some advice to the RFL on how to handle the NRL. What was some of the advice you dished
Well,
out or
basically, what
gave to
I'm
them?
saying is that the RFL can't just be the passive recipients of an NRL proposal. There are lots of things that I think the NRL could really do that would benefit the game in this country and in the long term generate um, a return. And we've got to strengthen our competition. The reason I think the NRL, I mean, if we come back to the whole rationale of the NRL being interested in investing in rugby league in the Northern Hemisphere. I think the rationale behind it is that rugby league is almost maxed out in the Southern Hemisphere. There's not a massive amount of further growth potential in rugby league in the Southern Hemisphere. Obviously, you're going to Perth and Papua New Guinea, maybe a second team in New Zealand. But after that, you're fairly limited in how you can grow the sport. Whereas in England, of course, there's a lot more potential. There's a much bigger population. There's a potentially bigger payoff if you can popularise the game. So I think the NRL can recognise that. And as far as I understand it, the NRL have got a potential deal with DAZN, the streaming service that now owns Foxtel. And DAZN would like to have the rights to World Rugby League, as far as I understand it. The deal that's been pitched to DAZN would be far more profitable if it included Northern Hemisphere Rugby League than if it just included the NRL. So I think that's probably the motivation behind the NRL's interest in British Rugby League, that they could do a pretty significant deal with DAZN that would see British Rugby League moving from Sky to DAZN, and getting part of that uplift in money. I mean, at the moment, we get about £21.5 million a year from Sky Sports, and a figure of as much as £50 million a year has been mentioned as potentially coming from DAZN. The only problem is, though, that DAZN is a company that has been known for not necessarily going through with its contracts in the past with various football associations in Europe. It's entered into contracts and then pulled out of them, and I'm quite worried, if I'm honest about it, Jake, that leaving Sky and going to DAZN would be a massive risk for Northern Hemisphere for Super League, and I mean at some point money talks, doesn't it? But we'd need at least a 10-year absolute guarantee from DAZN, absolutely iron cast guarantee of the money continuing to flow if we were to leave Sky for a significant upgrade in money. So I think that's, I'm not sure whether ultimately the British clubs would go for that, or the British game under the chairmanship of Nigel Wood would go for that. I'm not at all sure that they would. But then again, it depends on what Sky offers in the next contract, because that new contract, the next TV contract, begins next year in 2027 for us. It doesn't begin till 2028 for the NRL. So it's quite an interesting conundrum, I think, that the game faces over here, both over here and in Australia. Because of course the guy who's actually under a lot of pressure when we come to talking about TV contracts is Peter Vlandis himself, because he's been saying that the next TV deal for the NRL is going to be record-breaking, and I hope it is. But I'm not sure that record-breaking deal will emerge from DAZN and Channel 9 as were the current broadcasters. I mean, they may well get an upgraded contract, but I'm not sure that those organisations could afford to pay at the level that Peter Vlandis is hoping for. And I could be wrong, of course, but I just get that feeling, and I think that's why they're taking such a great interest in British Rugby League.
Yeah, it's a tough one because Peter V'landys has been banging the NRL rugby league drum for so long now. He's been talking a very big game, and you hope that he can come through with the goods. But one note I want to talk about, mate, is I noticed this year with the Vegas broadcast, Fox League, their production wasn't what it has been in the previous years. Like the NRL 360 show, I think every single episode that they filmed while they were over there, they did it off the balcony of a hotel room, whereas in previous years they've had a big stage set up down on the strip.
Fremont Street.
Yeah, and it makes me nervous whether, if DAZN are to come in, offer a big money deal, you want to see big money production alongside of that,
Of course.
because it's all well and good to get all this money, but if the product doesn't look good on TV or like a top tier sport, it's just a little bit embarrassing, I think, as a fan. And I was a little bit embarrassed watching some of the production over there, I guess a couple of weeks ago, and that was, one of the first things I noted. But if DAZN do take over the rights in England, are you saying you would like to see a long term deal, or is the game at a
Well,
point there where we should
if
I was going
DAZN
to
do
say,
take over in
sorry, yeah.
England, then it's got to be a long-term deal to justify moving away from Sky. Because once you move away from Sky, you can never go back again. If Sky have had various sports in the past. I mean, Rugby Union they moved away from Sky, and they've never gone back again. They're with TNT or even the smaller channel Premier Sport these days, and they're not getting terrific contracts as far as I'm aware. So you've got to be very careful. Sky are a lot of people in England like to complain about Sky's coverage of rugby league, which I think is a nonsense. I think their coverage is, by and large, very, very good. Given our position in the pecking order in sport in this country. Obviously, football is just so far ahead that obviously they get the vast majority of Sky's resources devoted to them. But given the nature of our sport and its coverage on Sky, I think a lot of. I mean, there's no doubt that there's always room for improvement, Jake. Let's not make any mistake about that. But I think we get quite a good service from Sky by and large, and if I were running the game over here, I'd take quite a bit of convincing to move away from there, because, as you say, you might move away for more money, but lower production values. And what good would that do? And you know perfectly well that your audiences on DAZN would be much more limited than your audiences on Sky. I mean, I'll give you another example. I quite like watching boxing, professional boxing, and probably my second favourite sport after rugby league. And Sky used to broadcast all the big boxing events. They were noted for it, and they used to put on great productions and so on. But gradually, a lot of boxing has moved to DAZN and elsewhere. Eddie Hearn's Matchroom people, when their contract with Sky came to an end, they moved to DAZN. And frankly, a lot of boxing fans like me haven't followed them there. I think I've watched very, very few fights on DAZN, if any. And when you move bases, the audience doesn't necessarily follow you, and I think that's so important. And you've got you with Rugby League on Sky, we've got an established audience, and we need to ensure that we don't do anything that reduces that audience, because we just simply can't afford to do that. And you've got to keep your audience and build on it, not reduce it. And that's so obvious, isn't it, really?
Hmm. Yeah, I almost if Sky can get close to the DAZN deal, you'd stay with Sky, I think. And I'd also like to see the English game take a punt on maybe signing another 3 or 4 year deal, in the hopes that the potential around the game, they can grow it to a bigger audience, and then I guess renegotiate in 3 or 4 years down the track, and then get an even better deal. I guess if you go with the zone and you lock in this long 10-year deal, that gives you security. But what if the game booms, and then you're stuck on that deal for a long period of time? So
That's true.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the one negotiating, Martin. But
Mm.
that's my thoughts.
Well, I mean, obviously, there will be. I mean, IMG are involved in the negotiations, and they are skilled negotiators with broadcast deals. They've built their reputation on it, so hopefully they'll do a great job for rugby league. But it's interesting that when you look at the future of Super League, I think it's probably fair to say that from next year, London Broncos will be in Super League. Hopefully, with the same owners, Grant Vexel and Darren Lockyer, and hopefully making a significant impact in Super League. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for Super League for quite a long time. If we've got a London Broncos side that is very competitive when it gets into Super League and starts drawing decent crowds at the Cherry Red Record Stadium, assuming they're still playing there, I think that will make a very significant impact on the audience for Super League. And let's hope that it does. By the way, there is talk of the other organisation, TNT, which currently runs the Rugby Union Premiership as things stand at the moment. And they are apparently quite seriously interested in making a bid for Super League as well. You never know, their aim might be to create a rugby channel, both league and union combined. Who knows? But so I think, hopefully that interest will be pursued because, they're another organisation that might have something quite significant to offer. And I think they've been bought out, is it by Warner Brothers quite recently? So, or is it Paramount? I'm
Yeah.
not quite so sure. One of the big American companies. So again, if you're linking rugby league to what happens in the United States, TNT may not be a bad option if we are to leave Sky, but who knows?
Yeah, I just searched it up, mate. Warner Brothers,
Yeah,
who also own Discovery, so they've bought TNT. But yeah, I agree, mate. All the competition, any broadcaster that shows a bit of interest will only push that broadcast deal higher and higher. So
well, let's hope
the
so.
more demand, the
Yeah,
better.
let's hope so. Hmm. Hmm.
Now, mate, we've spoken a fair bit about the injury bug that's crippling teams at the moment. There's a lot of fullbacks that have gone down. But I saw
Yeah, don't be a
this week in the
fullback,
head,
or Gus.
and they get criticised for not doing any work because they stand at the back of defence
Hmm.
and they keep getting injured. But looks like Trey Fuller's emerging as a potential target for Super League clubs to go after. He's currently in the Dolphin system, but sitting behind Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow. You think it'd be a
He's a
good
very
call
good
for?
player.
Mm.
Oh, I
And
think
he's
he's a
from
very
Central
good player. I think
Queensland
it'd
as
be
well.
yeah. I think it'd be a great signing for somebody if he's available. Whether he'd be available on a full transfer or not, I'm not quite so sure. Do the Dolphins are the Dolphins prepared to let him go?
Not sure yet. It's all just rumours at the moment, but you'd have to think for some of the players in these teams that have got a lot of depth, if they could negotiate a loan deal, perhaps where a player comes over and plays maybe half a season or as long as needed,
Mm.
you have to think that experience would be better for the player than playing Queensland Cup or New South Wales Cup here in Australia. Um, just a matter of whether he'd have to pick up his family and move them over as well. But um, yeah, it got me thinking with all these fullbacks out. There's only so many backup fullbacks that can come in and play to a similar standard, and yeah, whether Trey Fuller could be an option is another question.
You never know, and but I'd have thought the Dolphins might not want to let him go because I mean, again, Hamiso Fidau has only got to pick up an injury, and he's Trey Fuller's the guy they fall back on. So I'm not sure that would be a great move on their part to let him go if he was wanting to come over to England, which I mean I'm not sure whether he does or not, but who knows?
I mean, yeah, and you're right, particularly through that Origin period, it's always good to have some of these players available.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Now, I saw an article pop up, and it must have been a conversation that happened on radio over here, but there was a bit of a discussion around whether player salaries should be made public. What do you think about this, Martin? Do you think Super League player salaries should be made public? Do you think the NRL players' salaries should be made public?
Well, I'll tell you what, it would be interesting. I mean, in the NFL, I think players' salaries are made public, aren't they? I think people do know how much NFL players earn. Of course, they earn an absolute fortune compared to rugby league players anywhere in the world. Um, but but for example, when St Helens beat Bradford at the weekend, I think it's true to say that St Helens probably had £1 million worth of salary cap players who were absent from the side that actually turned out against Bradford. And I think what would be quite interesting, and I'd encourage British Rugby League to do this, or the Super League to do this, is every time a team turns out, and they've got the 17 or 18 player match day squad, it would be interesting to know what the total value of the those players are on the salary cap. So, for example, what was the total value of Saints players who turned out against Bradford last week, and what was Bradford's value? I think that'd be really interesting information, actually, and I'd love to be able to publish it without necessarily knowing what every player is paid. It'd just be fascinating to know what the salary cap value of every team is that in every team in every game it's played. That would be my view. I'm not necessarily. I think it might be too much of an intrusion of privacy to actually learn what each player is paid. I'm sure you wouldn't want. I don't know how much you earn, but I'm sure you wouldn't want it to be made public anywhere, would you?
Mate,
It's a private matter for you.
yeah, that's
And
right.
the same with me.
Yeah, mate, and look, hey, I'm always willing to make more. That's for sure. Whatever that value is, it can always be more.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I'm sort of. I think it would provide some good transparency. But I think like the English culture, the Australian culture, we like to keep that stuff private. And as you said, mate, if they did do a total team salary and there was an upset, let's say the World Club Challenge where Hull KR beat the Broncos, I'd love to see those two salaries compared
Yeah, it would be
heading into
fascinating,
that
wouldn't it?
game.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Now, the Zach Lomax saga kind of came to an end here last week, mate, but it's officially come to an end now. He's signed a new deal with the Western Force in the Super Rugby here in Australia. What are your thoughts on this signing, mate? And, if he's in Perth, a couple of years down the track, Perth Bears might be
Well,
able to come knocking.
I'd hoped that he would come to Super League, if I'm really honest about it, because he's a very good player, and I would have loved to see him staying in rugby league. Instead, he's going to the Western Force in Perth, who draw an average crowd of about 5,000. Um, so that's going to be not so good for him, and his salary is going to be far less than the salary he would have been earning if he'd stayed at Parramatta or even gone to Melbourne. So, and I mean, he gave a press conference, didn't he, where he talked about his ambition to play for the Wallabies and all that sort of stuff. But whether he will actually achieve that or not, who knows? It's a good luck to him. I hope he does, obviously, but it's a bit of a come down for him having to play Super Rugby in Western Australia. It seems to me, but nonetheless, um, every time an NRL player goes to rugby union, as regular as clockwork, you know that there's going to be an article in the Sydney Morning Herald by Peter Fitzsimons, the ex-Wallaby player who now writes a regular sporting column for them, mocking rugby league and saying, you're losing all your best players to rugby union, and we've got a global game and you haven't, and all that nonsense. He's the most incredible snob um, of probably of any. I mean, there are a few snobs in Australia, Jake, as I'm sure you know, but he certainly takes the biscuit. He's actually not a bad writer. He can be quite an amusing writer in his own way. But as I say, every time whoever it is, you know perfectly well that a couple of days after the signing's announced, his column will appear just taking the mickey out of rugby league and saying, we're going to be shorn of all our greatest stars because they can't resist the tremendous lure of rugby union. And I mean, it's just crazy. It's interesting, isn't it, to look at the record of some of those who have made the switch in recent years. Joseph Suoli'i is going to be out for most of this season with the Waratahs because he apparently did his hamstring in the in the warm up to their most recent game, I think it was, and he's going to be out for 2 to 3 months now. And it's interesting when he went across to rugby union. He played in a test match against England at Twickenham and got sensational headlines because he did look very good in that code. But since then, he's been being paid a ridiculous amount of money, but quite frankly, he's not really yet delivered on it. And, and I think that's a warning to other people. But I noticed the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian newspapers are both now saying that the next kid off the block who might be doing this is this young kid Makasini, the West Tigers young sensation, who looks an absolutely brilliant young player. They're all asking him, do you want to go to rugby union now? The Sydney Morning Herald does seem to be a very pro-rugby union newspaper and quite begrudging when it comes to rugby league. I mean, there's a lot of rugby league in the Sydney Morning Herald, of course, because there has to be, because it's such a major sport in Sydney. But you can tell from looking at its coverage that it would much prefer it if rugby union were the major sport. But fortunately, it isn't. And in fact, at the weekend, the Waratahs got beaten at home by the Wellington-based Hurricanes team in Super Rugby. I think they got something like 60 points put on them. So, they've got an awful long way to go to win back any significant degree of popularity. They got about 13,000 people in the Alliance Stadium for that match. This weekend, the Roosters will play the Rabbitohs in the NRL, and they'll probably sell it out, particularly because there's a very good chance that Alex Johnston might break Ken Irvin's all-time try-scoring record in Australian Rugby League if he scores 2 tries. So that would be sensational, wouldn't it, for the NRL? And I think the NRL is just blitzing rugby union at the moment in Australia, and people like Fitzsimons and his ilk and the Sydney Morning Herald and so on, they just don't seem able to find it easy to live with that reality, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there was a legendary article written about Peter Fitzsimons. I'm going to have to go through and find it for you, mate, because I'm sure you would enjoy it. It was heavily criticising some of his antics and absolutely tore him to shreds. So I'll have to send you through that one when I get a chance, mate. But yeah, I just, with the rugby Wallaby side, like, how many NRL players can they poach? Like, they're running out of positions in their backline if they're hoping to fit them all in. They've got Crichton, Suoli'i now. Their fullback, Tom Wright, he's a former rugby league player, came through the Manly Sea Eagles system. They've got a great winger in Max Jorgensen, who was linked to the Sydney Roosters but opted to stay in
Yeah,
rugby.
his father was
They've
Peter
got the
Jorgensen, of course, who was a very well-known rugby league player, wasn't he?
And then Len Ikitau, who's, I think last year he was nominated one of the best 12s in the game. So I don't know where they're going to fit all these league players they keep signing. But yes, very interesting. And I think it's kind of from the penthouse to the outhouse for Zach Lomax signing with Super Rugby.
I think so. I think
Uh,
it's disappointing. You wonder how he was advised, don't you? And to break that contract with Parramatta on the basis of what now looks like a vague promise from that R360 Rugby Union organisation that was supposed to launch in 2026, but now claims to be launching in 2028, and I'm pretty sure it never will launch. So that's a complete nonsense as far as I can see. So I think, he might have been advised not to leave Parramatta, and he might have ignored that advice. Who knows? So, you can't automatically blame his advisors without knowing what it was they advised him to do. But nonetheless, I think he's, taken a pretty wrong turning, really. And he signed that deal that, when his contract with Parramatta ended, he did agree that he wouldn't be able to play for another NRL club without Parramatta's permission. And that seemed an odd thing to agree, really. But he did agree it. And when you agree it, you've got to stick with it, Jake. So, I mean, he's hoisted with his own petard, isn't he?
Yeah. Now, mate, in international rugby league news, it's official. Kearnan Ponga has announced he's going to switch his allegiance and will represent New Zealand, which could see him feature in this year's World Cup.
Just come back to something my old mate Peter Fitzsimons said in his column that's been published today, that, Zach Lomax is joining a game that's got truly worldwide representation, which is a nonsense when it comes to rugby union, of course, but Peter Fitzsimons seems to have that fantasy. But nonetheless, I think it's true to say the Rugby Union World Cup will be in Australia next year. The Rugby League World Cup will be in Australia this year. And I think it's probably now fair to say that there are more potential winners of the Rugby League World Cup than the Rugby Union one, because there's only one winner of the Rugby Union World Cup that I can see on the way that things are going at the moment, and that is South Africa. I don't think any other country will come within a mile of them. And, I mean, I might be proved wrong, who knows? But whereas, with Kearnan Ponga going to New Zealand, and they've already got some great players in their squad. I think there are more nations that could potentially win the Rugby League World Cup: Australia, New Zealand, perhaps even England, and perhaps even Samoa, or possibly Tonga. There's more competitiveness in our tournament, at the very highest level than perhaps there will be in the Rugby Union tournament, unless all the other nations can catch up South Africa pretty pronto. I mean, England, the England Rugby Union team lost to Italy at the weekend, so I don't think they're looking all that great. And we ought to stop. We need to get people to respond to nonsense articles like the one that Fitzsimons writes in the Sydney Morning Herald, rather than simply, allowing him to get away with writing rubbish, really.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. All right, Martin, any other news you want to touch on before we get into this weekend's Challenge Cup matches?
No, I don't think so. I think that's covered most things, and we've got. Well, actually, we've got an interesting weekend to look forward to, so we better crack on with that, haven't we?
Yeah, mate. Well, Challenge Cup action. I'm trying to do the time differences in my head. Looks like Friday night. We've got
Friday
Wigan
night
taking
our
on
time,
Bradford. Or is it?
8 o'clock our time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which will
Wigan
be
taking on
7
Bradford.
o'clock in the morning, Saturday your time.
Yep. Actually, 6 a.m. Queensland time.
All right. Oh, so Queensland's just 10
Yeah, because I
hours.
think we've
Right.
still.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a daylight savings. I think New South Wales there an hour's difference between us and them. Don't ask me why. Um, so yeah, Wigan versus Bradford, mate. Who do you like in this one?
Well, you always go for Wigan, but without French and Field, as we said earlier, I think Bradford will really fancy their chances. And but I still can't quite see them winning. I think Wigan will edge it, and it'll be interesting to see who they play at fullback, who Wigan play at fullback to replace Jay Field. I think they'll go for a young man called Noah Hodkinson, although that's not yet confirmed. And it's going to be interesting to see how he plays. Again, coming back to what we said earlier, young players get the chance when established players are out injured or, unavailable. So it's a chance for a young player to take his opportunity, and it'll be interesting to see whether he does, if it's him.
Yeah. Yeah. In the other matchup, we have Wakefield taking on Leeds.
Well, that's going to be an interesting one because when Wakefield came into Super League last year, the first game of the season was at Leeds and they won it. Whether they can beat Leeds, and the thing that's been sensational for Leeds, of course, is Micah Sevo, who's, I think, scored 9 tries in 3 games. Absolutely ridiculous scoring rate. And if Micah Sevo is on form again on Friday night, you would imagine that Leeds might be a bit too good for Wakefield. And, I really hope, Sevo missed the whole of last season with injury that he suffered in a pre-season game. I hope that he has a clear run this year without injury, because he's going to be a big draw, certainly a big draw for Leeds fans, but should be a big draw everywhere else. And if we're building up a video montage of great tries this year, he will feature in quite a lot of them. So I think Leeds will be a bit too strong for Wakefield on Friday night, unfortunately, as I'm obviously originally a Wakefield fan, but I can't quite see Wakefield holding Leeds. I think Leeds will win by about 10 points.
Yeah, mate, he's certainly making up for missing last season. He's
Well,
loving a
Parramatta
try at the
fans must be
moment.
wondering why on earth they let him go. Put it that way.
He's playing outstanding. Mate, then on Saturday, we've got York versus Keighley, and is that a 12 p.m. a noon kickoff?
It is for some strange reason. I'm not quite sure why. But yeah, I can't see Keighley losing by less than 30 points to York at the moment. But, I hope they'll give them a closer game than that. And obviously, as a championship club, they wouldn't expect to go to York and win that game.
Yeah, and then at 2 p.m. we've got Gould Vikings taking on Warrington.
At Warrington, they've switched venues because Gould's stadium is still being finalised, actually. And obviously, you'd expect Warrington to rock. I think they'll rack up about 40 points margin in this game. I think it'll obviously be a comfortable win for Warrington, who haven't lost a game yet this season. So, they're looking as though this could be Warrington's year. We've said that so many times before, haven't we? But who knows? You never know.
Yeah, don't jinx it. Then at 3 p.m. we've got Huddersfield kicking off against Hull KR.
Well, Hull KR beat them convincingly at the weekend on last Sunday, 32 points to 6. And I would expect a similar score, particularly with Huddersfield's injury problems at the moment.
At the same time, we've got Leigh kicking off against Hull FC.
Well, I think this is where Leigh will bounce back, and Hull are going there a bit wounded with players missing, and I think Leigh will really want to come out and make a statement and put their season into gear. So I think Leigh will win by about 12 points.
And then at 6 p.m. We've got Castleford taking on Saints.
Well, that's a tough one, really, because I think Castleford are improving quite significantly. And, Saints have got a lot of injuries at the moment. If there's going to be a shock result, and it would be a shock result probably, but if there's going to be one, I think this could be the one. And I think Cass might just edge out Saints. I'd go with Cass for 6 points, 6 points margin. But I think that'll be possibly the game of the round alongside the Friday night games, the Wakefield v Leeds, Wigan v Bradford. I think Castleford Saints could be a really competitive game.
Yeah. And then the final matchup kicking off at 6:30 p.m. I've got here Catalans taking on Oldham.
Yes, 5:30 p.m. our time, 6:30 French time. You can only imagine the Catalans winning this game, and It's interesting. Catalans won at Lee at the weekend, and one of the key factors was I think Lewis Dodd has started to find his feet for the Catalans alongside Toby Sexton. And I was predicting at the start of the season they would be a very strong halfback combination, and I think they will be. But obviously they've taken a bit of settling in. But Dodd played extremely well, and there's a great try. I don't know if you ought to see the highlights of that game because there's a really great try by by the Catalans, scored by Dodd himself, where they cover the full length of the field, and it was the match winner for them. And it was one of those wonderful length of the field tries where the ball goes through several different players, and eventually resulted in Lewis Dodd touching down. And it was terrific. And Lewis Dodd, by the way, was interviewed on Sky after the game, and he's a really nice kid. He was sort of quizzed about his time in Australia under Wayne Bennett at Souths, and he refuses to badmouth Souths in any respect at all. He talks about what a valuable experience it was being there, whereas you might find that some people would sort of say, "Well, I wasn't really treated very well," but he's refusing to take that attitude. Very, very positive young guy. I hope he really
Yeah.
succeeds this year.
No, it's great to see because he's obviously taken the higher ground there or the higher road, and it would be very easy for him to come out and say I wasn't given a fair shot, and I think a lot of people understand that. So good on him. It's good to see him playing good. Um,
Absolutely.
all right, Martin. Well, anything else you want to mention, mate?
Well, just
We
one
might wrap it
final
up.
thing. It was great to see Halifax Panthers back on the field at the weekend. That the
Mm,
company that ran them was put into liquidation a few weeks ago, and some new directors have managed to put together a new company to create a revived version of the club, and they were able to step into the previous Halifax fixture list and so on. And on Sunday they hosted London Broncos, which they could have picked an easier game, I suppose. They went down 42 points to 4, but it was good to see them there, and it's good to see them back in the competition. And I hope that from now on they go from strength to strength, because we can't afford to lose clubs in the championship, and we want to see Halifax as a strong club that's competitive every week, and that might one day might even have Super League ambitions of its own.
and yeah, playing London first match back, no easy feat, and I think that scoreline probably surprised me.
Yeah, I thought it'd
After
be
seeing all the
bigger.
other scorelines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But no,
absolutely.
great to see them back, that's for sure. All right, mate. Well, we might wrap it up here and do it again next week, hey?
Okay, that'll be great, mate. Good to see you.
No worries. You too, mate.
Cheers.
Cheers.